Two of my paternal great-great-grandfathers came over to the United States sometime after the middle part of the 1800s. My guess is that they left because of economic conditions where they were, that living on the family farms and surviving in those days was going to be challenging. They probably had never traveled much out from that farm and their local community before going and getting on a ship that would sail to the United States. It would not have been a cruise ship, right, with casinos and lots of food choices like we have today and entertainment and a swimming pool. It would have been a passenger ship that spent days and maybe weeks getting across that ocean. At some point, they would have looked back and saw the land behind them disappear, just out of sight. And looking all around them, all they would have seen was ocean. Now, if you are on a cruise ship in these days and have lots of entertainment and other things, that ocean that you see everywhere can be beautiful and magnificent. But if you are traveling the ocean in the way that they did, fleeing economic struggle, headed towards a new place that you don't know what it's going to be like and uncertain what it's going to, how it's going to work out when you get there, looking around and seeing just ocean for as far as you can see in any direction might be a little bit more disconcerting. And if storms came up and the conditions weren't great, it would have even been more difficult. When all you can see is the ocean, it can be challenging. Today, for us, is a couple of weeks past Easter, but for our Bible story, Cleopas and his friend that are on the road to Emmaus are still on the day of Easter. And yet, it seems that all that they can see is the ocean that was part of the crucifixion, the pain and struggle and the grief. As they encounter Jesus, he asks them, "What are you talking about?" And it's clear that they say, all the things that have happened. He said, "What things?" They say, "The things about Jesus." It's clear that that's all they can talk about. Before Jesus joined them, these two gathered together for their walk, and you can imagine that maybe Cleopas said to his friend, "Well, where were you on the night of the crucifixion?" And his friend probably shared some of what he had done and said, "Well, Cleopas, what about you?" And maybe Cleopas shared his struggle of that night. Maybe he ended that by saying, "Did you hear about Peter?" And his friend said, "Yeah, he denied Jesus 3 times like Jesus said he would. He feels terrible." And then maybe the friend said, "What about Judas?" And maybe they then reflected on his betrayal and said something like, "Gosh, how do we not know? Was there a sign that we should have seen? Surely we could have prevented this if we had paid attention. What was going on with him?" And having talked about that day, maybe they turned their thoughts to the morning and said, "Those women said the tomb was empty, and some of the guys went and saw it, but we haven't seen Jesus. What does all this mean?" As Jesus encounters them, we're told they stood still looking sad. And that one of the things they said to Jesus was, "We had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel." What this tells us is that even though Jesus has been raised and they've heard rumors of this, that they are still stuck in the tragedy, still stuck in the grief. All they can see is the cross and the tomb. They are surrounded by ocean, and that is the only thing that they can take in just now. I don't know about you, but it feels like every conversation I have these days is about the virus and the quarantine and the economics of it. Because of our modern technology, my wife and I have been able to connect with friends all over the place, and all of those conversations are, how are you doing? What's going on with the schools in your community? How is your shut-in orders working where you live? How is it impacting you and your family? That's the conversations we have. When it's talk about church in my church work, it's about, well, how do we know when it's safe to open, and how long can we keep doing what we're doing, and what technology should we be getting for this next step of this? For all of you, I would bet that most of your conversations these days settle in the place of this virus and what is happening. And so it's like those disciples too, right? We are looking out at the ocean and it's all we see. And some of those conversations are harder than others because this virus and quarantine have not landed equally on everyone. Here in Orlando, we are in the land of hospitality and theme parks, and there are many who have been furloughed from their jobs, but then there's others who are considered within those same places essential and still working. And how do you have those conversations where your cube neighbor or your office mate or your coworker is now at home and you're still at work, maybe feeling guilty because you are, and trying to be thankful at the same time because you're the one that's still there. And all of this is hard, and it just steeps us in this conversation, and all we look around and see is the ocean, and it is stressful to be in this place where it is such a focus of our time and our attention. Even as birthdays and celebrations of anniversaries and other milestones happen, it's all done from a distance within this time, and all that we can sometimes see is the ocean. I wonder if Jesus never lost sight of the land of life that he was sent to bring us, the land of the love of God that he was sent to share with us, the land of resurrection toward which he was heading. But then I think on the cross when he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Maybe for a moment he did lose sight of that land and see just the ocean. But on his way to the cross, he never did lose sight. He never lost sight of us. He never lost sight of what he was sent to do, to show us how to live and be and love, and that coming out the other side of that death would be resurrection. He didn't lose sight of any of that. So that when he does become the resurrected Jesus, he comes and encounters these two disciples and shows them and shows us a bit about how we can live when all we can see is the ocean. It's striking to me that as he encounters them, he has to know what they're talking about. He surely overhears part of their conversation and knows that they're just still in that space of those 3 days of death and not yet to resurrection. And yet, Jesus pauses and says, "What are you guys talking about?" And they say all of these things, which he would have known what they meant by all of these things. And yet, he takes a moment in talking to them to say, what things? In that, Jesus gives them an opportunity to share their own struggle in their own voice. He doesn't presume to know what their struggle is. He doesn't assume even that Cleopas and his friend both have the same struggle. He says what things and gives them a chance to give voice to their grief, their struggle, and their pain. Then, he, because he's Jesus, can spend part of their walk unpacking Scripture for them. I'm not sure that we would do as well as that all the time, but the important thing he does is spend time with them processing. He spends time with them, helping them to work through and understand what is happening around them. Then, as Jesus gets ready to leave, it is clear that this has been a life-giving interaction for those two, and they ask him to stay, and he lingers for a while. Not forever, but long enough to continue to spend a bit of time and keep some time with them. And then he sits down around a table with them and breaks bread. It's easy to think of this in most seasons of the church as a communion meal, when we gather around the table and share that meal together. But this feels, in this day, a lot more like he just came home to dinner with them and broke that bread and blessed it in the way he did the bread at the feeding of the 5,000 and every meal he gathered at. And in that breaking of the bread, they see who he is, and it's then that he disappears. And so if you track through this story, you have Jesus giving them an opportunity to share their voice, Jesus processing it with them and helping them to grow deeper in their own understanding, lingering when this opportunity has proved to be a good and life-giving conversation, and then sharing a meal with them. Today, the resurrected Jesus, who never loses sight of us, invites us maybe into this same sort of path. Right now, when we can only see the ocean and we are uncertain of when we are going to find land again and we don't know what that coast is going to look like, we can do the very same things Jesus did. We can share in our conversations and first listen. Give each other an opportunity to voice our own struggle and our own pain, all of which are different. Give us an opportunity to have our own voice in this time. And having listened, then, we can be in conversation and spend time together processing. That can be through lenses of faith. It can be through our friendship. It can be through just mutual questions and conversation that may not have answers, but give us an opportunity to go more deeply into our thoughts and our hearts and our prayers so that we can wrestle with this situation in which we're in. So having given voice and listened to one another and processed together, Sometimes these conversations will be really life-giving, and it'll be time maybe to move on, but maybe we can choose to linger just a bit longer. And then share some meals together. For some of you as families, this is a time where you are sharing meals together more than you have before. And take that opportunity to let that be a blessing and to know that Jesus breaks bread with us whenever we gather around tables. For others, the meals that you would have shared with the people that you know and love aren't happening now because of this time of shut-in. But I encourage you to find ways to eat together anyway, to phone a friend and have dinner together, maybe even make the same food as you gather around tables and know that Jesus is there too. And even when we're around tables all by ourselves, Jesus is still with us because he never loses sight of us, even when all that we can see is the ocean. In this text today, Jesus gives us really a way to live through this time, a way of being together that focuses on listening and understanding and processing and even eating meals together. When I think back to my two great-great-grandfathers getting on those ships, they did not know what the coast was going to look like when they got there, but they did have hope that they would get there. We may only be able to see the ocean of quarantine and the ocean of virus right now, but Jesus is already at that coast where we're headed. Jesus has never lost sight of love and life that he invites us into. And on this day, we too live with the hope that the coast is there, that the land is coming, and that it will be the land of love and faith and hope and life that Jesus promises to give us. May we see it soon, and may we enjoy and find ways to bless each other in this journey as we go. Amen.